Hi there, this is Joan Van Ark, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
You know, writers in general are notoriously bad verbal tellers of stories. We do much, much better behind a typewriter. So I hope you'll bear with me while I tell you about a few stories that happen to be the first ones we're shooting in our current production cycle.
Ed Robertson and author guest Anne Serling and Jodi Serling, the daughters of Rod Serling and Marc Scott Zicree, author of the Twilight Zone Companion. Anne Serling, also the author of As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling. We're celebrating the 65th anniversary of the premiere of The Twilight Zone on CBS television, as well as the 100th anniversary of the birth of Rod Serling. Rod Serling's centennial birthday was this past December 25th. The Twilight Zone Companion is not only one of the best television reference books ever written, it is also one of the most influential, having influenced a whole generation of TV series creators and filmmakers, including J.J. Abrams and Vince Gilligan, while As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, offers readers an intimate look at Rod Serling as a father and as a visionary, blending both personal memories with rare family photographs and letters. Both As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, and The Twilight Zone Companion, available wherever books are sold, as well as Amazon.com. Marc, Anne, and Jodi, before we went to break, we were talking about how Rod was first and foremost a writer. As I mentioned before we started recording, a few months ago, I had a chance to watch the entire Twilight Zone series on Paramount Plus, and it's available on all sorts of platforms. But one of the cool things about watching it on Paramount Plus, not to give them a free ad on the show, but the prints on Paramount Plus include the wraparound at the end of the episode where he previews next week's show, and I think with every wraparound he did, he never failed to mention, next week we're going to have a story by George Clayton Johnson. Next week we're going to have a story by Ray Bradbury. Next week we're going to have a story by Buck Houghton. I mean, it was the writer in him who made sure that the writers who worked with him got their due.
But one thing that's really great is that he never said, next week it's a script by me, and it's just terrific. I'm a terrific writer. He had the generosity of spirit. He didn't need to blow his own horn, but he really wanted to put these writers. And when he won his second Emmy for Twilight Zone, he held up the award and he said, he addressed the other writers by name, and he said, come over to my house and we'll carve it up like a turkey. And, what a great guy.
This is a question for each of you. What do you think makes a good Twilight Zone episode? Anne first, and then Jodi, then Marc.
Well, I suppose a story that makes you think and then rethink, and is a teaching tool. For instance, there's a program in Binghamton called The Fifth Dimension, where students watch the episodes and they learn about mob mentality and scapegoating and racism. And these are only fifth graders, and yet they really, really get these programs. And the teacher showed the episode, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. And at the end, she asked the class, so who are the monsters? And she said the entire class stood up. Wow. So I think these episodes that, again, act as a teaching tool or just leave you, like any good movie or good literature, leave you haunted in some way. That, you retain this and have learned a lesson.
Yeah.
I think also, that my dad, every story that my dad wrote had pieces of him in it. I mean, they were very personal. And he didn't write just to entertain, but also to illuminate, social injustice. And he believed, and he was told that, his role of a writer was to menace the public conscience. That was important to him. His stories were definitely, challenging and heartbreaking, and even, more clearly knowledgeable and more personal to what my dad went through. Like when he went through the war, a lot of his stories depicted what he went through the war, or going back into time, walking distance, yearning for the growing up as a child and missing so much because he wasn't able to come back after the war to see his father when his father passed on. And that haunted him. And I think when he did Walking Distance, which was one of my favorites and most everybody's favorite, was because it was really him wanting to go back in the past and recapture what he had lost by going off to war. And it's my favorite episodes, and it makes me cry all the time when I see the end of it. It's just so incredibly personal and beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
He told a writing class that he had a propensity to write about the past, and it is because I'm sure the war, because he enlisted the day after he graduated from high school. He wanted to go to Germany to fight the Nazis, but of course he was sent to the Pacific. But and like so many vets, saw so much trauma, and he wasn't allowed to come home when his dad died, even though he had enough points. And it was a grief that he never really processed, like many of us don't. But
yeah. Well, also, the things so great about television, several things. It's a collaborative medium, and so when you have a writer like Rod, who at the same time was the producer, he was really the modern showrunner and the first modern showrunner where the writer runs the show as the producer. The buck stops with him, and Buck Houghton was there to help Rod bring that vision into the world. He was a perfect producing partner for Rod, and yet the great part is that it's such a powerful medium because you write a great script. And then it gets to the actors, and they see the great script, and then they turn into this great performance, like Walking Distance with Gig Young and Frank Overton as the father, so wonderful. And then it goes to, the cinematographer, George T. Clemens, and it looks phenomenal, gorgeous. It's the most beautiful black and white show ever made on television, Twilight Zone. And you have the director, Robert Stevens, who again brings that enormous ability with him. And then you have Bernard Herrmann, the great composer of Citizen Kane and Psycho and North by Northwest and so forth. And he reads that script and he sees what's going on, and he brings this incredible score. And so you have, great art doesn't come about accidentally. Great art comes about because people are putting in everything they've got, coming from the heart, not holding back, just really you make a jewel. It's just I've said before in interviews that Rod was our Leonardo da Vinci, and he really was, because most of us who work in television, and this is my 50th year as a professional writer, and I've done hundreds of hours of TV, we look to Rod as our Mount Everest, as the pinnacle of what can be done in the medium. And frequently when we're writing scripts, we'll go back and watch something like Walking Distance or Monsters Due on Maple Street, and we'll use that as sort of a divining rod for what, no pun intended, for what you can do if you don't aim low. Most people aim very low, and that's why most TV shows aren't about anything. They're about an hour. But Rod understood that this was an incredible opportunity because at that time there were only 3 networks. So you were reaching 30, 40 million people every time your episode aired. And I think Rod had a significant effect on the American public and the world public too.
I'm trying to remember the source of this quote. I believe it was Buck Houghton who described a typical most plays, most films, most television shows are structured in terms of 3 acts: conflict, complication, resolution. I believe it was Buck Houghton said a typical Twilight Zone, because it was short, it was 22 pages, it was 22 minutes. Everyththing was 3rd act because you had to focus on because you only had a limited amount of time to say what you needed to say. What do you each think of that? Anne, would you go first, please?
Well, there's a lot of pressure in that, isn't there?
Yeah. And Jodi, I don't know if you ever thought about that one. It's I can jump in too. Well, Richard Matheson said with Twilight Zone, the trick was you take the absolute, you make it as real world as you can, as realistic as possible, and you drop in one drop of the fantasy element. So it's whatever that fantasy element is, and then you play it out as straight as you can to the resolution. So whether you say it's all third act or whatever, but the great part of Twilight Zone, the thing I love about Twilight Zone is it's predicated on that twist ending. Most of the Twilight Zone episodes have a twist ending, but they're so full of heart and so full of humanity and so full of wisdom that you can watch them again and again and again, even when you know what the twist turn is. So Eye of the Beholder, for instance, with the woman waiting to see if she's been made to look normal under those wrapped bandages, you know what the gag is, you know what the reveal is, but you can still watch it again and again because Rod had this enormous empathy for his characters. And here's a woman just wanting to be normal, just wanting to be able to fit in and not be sent off to a reservation for the abnormal. And that was decades before disability rights and all of those things. But Rod could get under the skin, literally, of that person and then live that life. And phenomenal.
With the stories that he wrote, it didn't matter how long they were because he injected the thought right away what he was going to write about, and then he would expand on it. So, I know when they made the show an hour, it just didn't work. You needed it 30 minutes minus the commercial. So, and then with my dad's famous twist at the end, which were just, I've never known a writer to have these kind of twists. It was just even more mesmerizing and incredible. I mean, he was one of a kind for sure. Definitely.
Now, it's funny because Rod said that if he had the ending, he could write the script. But there were many stories where he had the first act, the second act, and no third act, and those never got made. And but the other part that's really fun is, people decry the fourth season of Twilight Zone was 18-hour-long episodes, and then went back to half hour for its final season. But and everyone agreed ultimately that the hour length was not ideal for Twilight Zone, even though Rod initially conceived Twilight Zone as an hour show. His first pilot that he wrote for Twilight Zone, the time element was an hour episode. But even within that hour season, Rod wrote On Thursday We Leave for Home with James Whitmore, which is a spectacular episode. And again, one can say, oh, well, sometimes Rod's repeating himself in various episodes, but many times he's visiting themes that he's never explored before. And that one about a man who actually is a hero, who saves these people's lives when they crash land on an alien planet. And then when rescue finally comes, he can't let go of his need to be the hero, to be the leader, and it ultimately maroons him. And it's just spectacular. It's gorgeous writing, and James Whitmore is phenomenal.
Yeah, my friend Joseph Doherty recently
my friend too.
Rod Serling at 100. He points to the James Whitmore episode as the quintessential Rod Serling, the quintessential Twilight Zone, which, considering it's an hour-long show, most people wouldn't think of the hour-longs in the same category as the 30s. But I agree. I agree with you, and I agree with Joe. It sustains the length of the hour form and gave him an opportunity to revisit some issues with a little more depth, but in a totally different concept.
Yes. Yeah, it's wonderful. And Joe Dougherty, of course, is a very, very good writer himself. He won an Emmy for 30-something and went on to Pretty Little Liars and all these other shows. An amazing guy.
Marc Scott Zicree is with us via Zoom, along with Jodi Serling and Anne Serling, the daughters of Rod Serling. Marc Scott Zicree, of course, author of The Twilight Zone Companion, while Anne Serling is the author of As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling. Anne, Jodi, and Scott will be back next week for part 2 of our conversation. We'll continue to talk about the legacy of Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone in particular, plus Anne and Jodi will share a few more personal memories of growing up with their dad. Part 2 of our conversation with Anne Serling, Jodi Serling, and Marc Scott Zicree next week on TV Confidential. In the meantime, both The Twilight Zone Companion and As I Saw Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, available wherever books are sold, as well as Amazon.com. We'll be back with more TV Confidential right after this.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
One more item: if you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, You know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
This is Irene Susan, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Robertson with a reminder that the next edition of TV Confidential will premiere next week on this station at the usual time. We'll play part 2 of our celebration of the 100th birthday of Rod Serling, along with Ann Serling, Jodi Serling, and Marc Scott Zicree. Plus, we'll welcome back singer-actress Linda Pearl. In the meantime, a reminder that Twilight Zone Companion by Marc Scott Zicree, as well as Ann Serling's book, As I Saw Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, available wherever books are sold, while Russ Meyer's Vixen, now available on Blu-ray through Severn Films, severnfilms.com, wherever else Blu-rays are sold. You can follow Harrison Page on Facebook, as well as harrisonpage.com. Ed Robertson, back with Tony Figueroa, Donna Ellen, Phil Grace, and Susan Silver. Thank you so much for listening. Stay healthy, stay safe. We'll talk to you next time on TV Confidential.